And here's my husband, the human calculator who builds glass boxes for a living. Chloe's voice rang out across the gallery, followed by tittering laughter from her circle of artsy friends. That was the exact moment I knew our marriage was over. 12 years dissolved in a single contemptuous sentence. I stood frozen in the doorway, champagne flute in hand, as my wife continued to use me as her punchline. I walked slowly toward her group, the sound of expensive shoes on polished concrete echoing through the space. Every eye turned to me. Chloe's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered, extending her hand toward me as if I were a late guest she was graciously welcoming. "It's over," I said, my voice quiet but clear enough for everyone in her immediate circle to hear. I set my untouched champagne on a nearby pedestal, displaying some twisted metal monstrosity that probably cost more than a car. Then I turned and walked out, ignoring Chloe calling my name with increasing urgency behind me. That moment changed everything. But to understand how we got there, you need to know our beginning. I met Chloe Morgan at a mutual friend's rooftop party in downtown Chicago 15 years ago. She was wearing a vintage dress that looked like it came straight from the 1950s, her dark hair piled artfully on top of her head. She stood out among the crowd of young professionals in their generic cocktail attire. I noticed her immediately, not just because she was beautiful, but because she was standing alone, intently studying the skyline while everyone else was engaged in loud conversation. The Sears Tower will always be the Sears Tower to me, no matter what they rename it, I said, joining her at the railing. She turned, revealing striking green eyes lined with dramatic black makeup. "I was just thinking the same thing." "Willis Tower," she scoffed. "Sounds like someone's boring uncle." "I'm Mark Callahan," I said, extending my hand. "Chloe Morgan," she replied, her handshake firm. "So what do you do, Mark Callahan, besides criticize corporate naming rights?" "I draw buildings," I said simply. "I'm an architect with Hammett Partners." Her eyes widened slightly. "Hammett? The firm that designed the Riverside Arts Center? That place is spectacular." I smiled, pleasantly surprised. Most people reacted to my profession with polite disinterest or bad jokes about blueprints. I was on that team, actually, junior position, but I got to contribute to the exhibition space design. "Well, now I'm impressed," she said, leaning closer. "I'm finishing my master's in art history. I've been dreaming of opening a gallery someday, a space that actually serves the art instead of just the egos behind it." We talked for hours that night, long after most guests had left. Chloe had opinions about everything, from the criminal underuse of natural light in modern galleries to the way certain Chicago skyscrapers bullied their way into the skyline. She was passionate, knowledgeable, and completely captivating. By the end of the night, I knew I wanted to see her again. Our first official date was at the Art Institute. I'd suggested dinner and a movie, but Chloe laughed. "So conventional," she teased. "Let's do something that will actually tell us about each other." So instead, we spent a Sunday afternoon wandering through the modern wing. Chloe was in her element, pointing out details in paintings I would have missed, explaining the historical context behind various movements. What impressed me most wasn't just her knowledge, but her genuine enthusiasm. She didn't try to sound superior or condescending, something that would change dramatically in later years. "What about this one?" I asked, stopping in front of a massive canvas with chaotic splashes of color. Chloe tilted her head, considering. "Technically impressive, but it's trying too hard. Art shouldn't have to scream to be heard." "That's exactly how I feel about certain buildings," and I said, "the ones that demand attention rather than earning it." She smiled, taking my arm. "Maybe we're not so different after all, architect." Our courtship was a whirlwind. Chloe took me to underground art shows in converted warehouses and introduced me to artists whose names I could never remember, but whose work challenged my perceptions of space and form. I took her to architectural landmarks and taught her about load-bearing walls and cantilevers. We'd argue playfully about the merits of form versus function, but always with mutual respect. 3 months into dating, I took Chloe to see a building site, my first major project as lead designer for a small community library on the South Side. It was just steel beams and concrete then, nothing glamorous. Most women would have been bored, but Chloe walked through the skeleton structure with genuine interest. "Tell me what will go here," she said, standing in what would become the main reading room. I described my vision. The floor-to-ceiling windows to capture northern light, The built-in shelving that would double as seating nooks, the central skylight designed to create moving patterns across the floor as the day progressed. "You're not just building a box," she said when I finished. "You're creating an experience." She kissed me then, hard and passionate, surrounded by construction dust and potential. "I love that you see the world this way." That was the first time we said "I love you," standing in the bones of a building that didn't exist yet, both of us seeing beyond what was to what could be. That ability to envision potential was what connected us, what made us work despite our different worlds. It's also what made her eventual contempt so devastating. When Chloe graduated and started talking more seriously about opening her gallery, I encouraged her. I had just made associate at Hammett and was handling more significant projects. We were engaged by then, and I believed in her vision completely. "You know, it could take years to turn a profit," I warned her as we sat in our apartment, surrounded by her business plans and my building models. "I know," she said, chewing on the end of her pen, "but I have to try, Mark. There's so much talent in this city that never gets wall space because they don't fit the established gallery scene." "Then we'll make it happen," I said, and I meant it. I remember the night I proposed. I'd planned an elaborate evening, reservations at Alinea, a private architectural boat tour, the perfect ring burning a hole in my pocket. But that morning, Chloe called me, ecstatic. "Mark, the Grayson Foundation approved my grant application. They're giving me seed money for the gallery." My carefully orchestrated proposal went out the window. Instead, I rushed home with champagne and takeout from her favorite Thai place. Chloe was dancing around our apartment, playing music too loud, her hair wild and her eyes bright with triumph. "I'm so proud of you," I told her, pouring champagne into coffee mugs because we couldn't find clean glasses. "It's not enough to actually open the gallery," she admitted, "but it's validation. Someone believes in my vision." "I've always believed in your vision," I said, and took the ring box from my pocket. "Just like I believe in us." Her eyes went wide. "Mark, I had this whole fancy night plan, but this feels right. Building something together, celebrating each other's victories. That's what I want for the rest of my life." She threw her arms around me, knocking champagne everywhere. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." We married in a small ceremony at the Chicago Cultural Center under the world's largest Tiffany dome. Chloe joked that it was the only time she'd let Tiffany upstage her art selections. She looked stunning in a non-traditional blue dress, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive. 2 years into our marriage, I used part of my bonus to help Chloe secure a small storefront in an up-and-coming neighborhood. We spent weekends painting walls, installing track lighting, and transforming the space into Morgan Gallery. Opening night was magical. Chloe had curated a collection from 5 local artists who had never shown in a commercial gallery before. The place was packed, and I felt immensely proud watching my wife in her element, explaining the works with such insight and enthusiasm. I still remember one particular moment from that night. A wealthy collector, known for his influence in the Chicago's art scene, was examining a large mixed media piece. "The artist is self-taught," Chloe was explaining. "He combines traditional techniques with materials he salvages from abandoned buildings." "Interesting concept," the collector said, sounding anything but interested. "But where did he study? Who has he shown with before?" "Does it matter?" Chloe challenged, not backing down despite the man's status. "The work speaks for itself. Either it moves you or it doesn't." The collector looked surprised, then laughed. "Refreshing perspective. I'll take it." Later that night, after everyone had left, Chloe and I sat on the floor of her gallery, surrounded by empty wine glasses and the lingering energy of success. "You were amazing tonight," I told her. "We were amazing," she corrected me, leaning against my shoulder. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." I wish I could have preserved that moment, bottled it like fine wine to sustain us through what was to come. The gallery struggled at first, as we expected. I covered our personal expenses and many of the gallery's bills too. Chloe worked tirelessly, building relationships with artists and collectors. Slowly, her reputation grew. By our 5th anniversary, Morgan Gallery was known as a place to discover emerging talent, and Chloe was becoming a respected voice in the local art scene. That's when things began to change. The first time I noticed it was at a dinner party with Chloe's new Art World friends. Someone asked what I did, and before I could answer, Chloe jumped in. Mark builds very practical, very stable buildings, she said with a slight emphasis on practical that somehow made it sound like a limitation rather than a virtue. I let it slide. Later that night, I mentioned it to her. Did I sound dismissive? She asked, seeming genuinely surprised. I didn't mean to. I'm proud of what you do. It's just different from my world. Our worlds used to overlap quite nicely, I pointed out. She kissed me, and they still do. I'm sorry if I made it sound otherwise. I believed her then, but similar incidents followed. Chloe began referring to my work as conventional or corporate, always with that same slight tone that suggested limitation. Meanwhile, she was spending more time with a crowd that spoke in art theory jargon and seemed to value shock value over substance. The gallery was doing well enough now that Chloe had hired an assistant, a 20-something named Jasper with multiple piercings and an MFA from RISD. He looked at me like I was a curious artifact whenever I stopped by the gallery after work, still in my suit. "How's the corporate world today, Mark?" he'd ask with a smirk that never reached his eyes. Chloe never corrected him. In fact, she seemed amused by his barely concealed disdain. I began to visit the gallery less frequently. One evening, I overheard Jasper talking to Chloe in her office as I arrived unexpectedly. "You know, you're too good for this neighborhood now," he was saying. "The Morgan Gallery brand has outgrown this space. And honestly, the design is so 2010. "Mark helped design this space," Chloe replied, but there was no defense in her tone, just acknowledgement of a fact. "No offense, but it shows," Jasper said. "It's so conventional, no edge. If you want to attract the right crowd, you need a space that makes a statement." I cleared my throat as I entered, and Jasper had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed. "Mark, didn't hear you come in," he said, recovering quickly. "We were just brainstorming some updates for the gallery." "I heard," I said coolly. "Always happy to discuss design options, given that architecture is my profession." Jasper made a hasty exit, and Chloe sighed. "Don't be offended. He's young and trying to impress me." "And you? Are you also unimpressed with the space I designed?" "It was perfect for what we needed then," she said diplomatically. "But maybe it's time for something more adventurous." "Adventurous doesn't have to mean dismissing functionality," I argued. "The best designs balance both." Chloe patted my arm in a way that felt condescending. "Not everyone shares your utilitarian perspective, honey. At home, we still had good days. Chloe could still be the woman I fell in love with, curious, passionate, and warm. But increasingly, there was a distance between us. She'd come home late from gallery events, buzzing with stories about people I didn't know and couldn't relate to. My own work stories, about the sustainable mixed-use development I was leading or the community center we were designing pro bono, seemed to bore her. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, scrolling through her phone as I talked. I tried to bridge the gap. I suggested collaborating on a project. Perhaps I could design a custom installation space for one of her artists. Chloe laughed. "No offense, Mark, but we're going for boundary-pushing work. Your aesthetic is a bit too clean-lined for what we're doing." It stung, but I kept trying. I attended her openings, made polite conversation with her increasingly pretentious circle, and continued to subsidize the gallery when sales were slow. The space itself was in a building owned by a real estate company that Hammett had designed several properties for. I'd helped Chloe secure the lease at below market rate through my connections. There was a particular incident about 6 years into our marriage that should have been a warning sign. Chloe was featuring a controversial installation artist who created works involving bodily fluids. I found the concept repulsive, but I respected Chloe's right to curate as she saw fit. The opening drew a large crowd, including several influential critics. One of them, a woman named Vanessa, who wrote for a prestigious art journal, cornered me by the bar. "You must be the long-suffering husband," she said, her tone making it clear she found this amusing. "I prefer supportive partner," I replied. "How diplomatic." She sipped her wine. "It must be challenging being married to someone so visceral when your own work is so contained." "Architects can be passionate too," I said, keeping my tone light. "We just express it differently." Yes, in straight lines and right angles." She laughed as if she'd made a clever joke. Chloe tells us you're designing another office building. How thrilling. Before I could respond, Chloe appeared beside us. Vanessa, I see you've met Mark. Yes, we were just discussing the fascinating contrast between your artistic approaches. Oh, Mark doesn't really have an artistic approach, Chloe said with a laugh. He's all about function over form. If a building stays upright and people can use the bathrooms, he considers it a success. They both laughed, and I felt something hard form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just Chloe failing to defend me. This was her actively participating at belittling my profession, my passion. Excuse me, I said, setting down my drink. I need some air. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply. A part of me wanted to walk away right then, to not go back inside, but I did, because I still believed we could find our way back to mutual respect. 7 years into our marriage, I made partner at Hammett. It was a significant achievement. I was one of the youngest partners in the firm's history. I took Chloe to celebrate at Alinea, making reservations months in advance. That's wonderful news, she said when I told her, but her enthusiasm seemed forced. Over dinner, she spent more time talking about an installation artist she'd just signed than asking about what my new position would entail. He uses actual human hair in these intricate weavings, she explained, animated in a way she rarely was with me anymore. The commentary on bodily autonomy and ownership is just brilliant. Sounds unusual, I offered, trying to show interest. She rolled her eyes. You architects are all the same. If it doesn't have clean lines and serve a practical purpose, you just don't get it. That's not fair, Chloe. I've always supported your artists, even when I don't personally connect with their work. Support isn't the same as understanding, she said, sipping her wine. Anyway, I'm thinking of rebranding the gallery. Morgan Gallery sounds so traditional. I'm considering Liminal instead. What do you think? I thought the name was pretentious, but I just nodded. If that's what you want. The rebranding came with a renovation that I paid for. Chloe hired a designer known for creating experiential spaces, who painted the walls charcoal gray and installed jagged lighting fixtures that cast dramatic shadows. The clean, bright gallery I had helped build was gone, replaced by something that felt deliberately uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge the viewer, Chloe explained when I questioned the design choices. Art shouldn't be comfortable, Mark. It should provoke. The designer, a thin man with an affected European accent despite being from Michigan, nodded in agreement. The conventional white cube gallery is dead. This is a space that demands engagement. I looked around at the sharp edges and intentionally disorienting layout. It also demands that people watch their step. Have you considered the flow of visitor traffic or accessibility issues? Chloe and the designer exchanged a look that clearly communicated their shared opinion of my concerns. Not everything has to be ADA compliant to be valid, Mark, Chloe said with exaggerated patience. This is an art space, not a government building. Basic accessibility isn't a bureaucratic checkbox, Chloe. It's about respecting your visitors. My visitors come for the artistic experience, she countered. They understand that sometimes discomfort is part of that experience. I gave up arguing, but I quietly hired a contractor to adjust some of the most problematic aspects of the design when Chloe was away at an art fair. She either didn't notice or chose not to mention it. Our home life became increasingly strained. Chloe started hosting late-night gatherings for artists and critics at our loft after gallery events. I'd come home from work to find strangers lounging on our furniture, drinking our wine, and having loud debates about the commodification of trauma in contemporary art. If I tried to join the conversation, there would be a subtle but noticeable shift in tone, as if they were simplifying concepts for my benefit. One night after everyone had gone, I confronted Chloe. Do you know how it feels to be treated like an outsider in my own home? I asked. Don't be so sensitive, she replied, clearing wine glasses. They're just passionate about art. Not everyone wants to discuss load-bearing walls and zoning regulations. That's not the point, and you know it. You and your friends treat me like I'm some kind of corporate drone who couldn't possibly understand creativity. She sighed dramatically. Well, you have to admit, Mark, you do live in a very structured world. Everything has to make sense, has to serve a purpose. Art isn't like that. It's messy and emotional and sometimes completely irrational. And you think I can't appreciate that? After all these years together, you still see me as some kind of one-dimensional technician? I didn't say that, she protested, but her expression suggested otherwise. Things deteriorated further when Chloe decided to feature an artist whose work explicitly mocked architectural conventions. The centerpiece of the show was a distorted model of a glass office tower with miniature figures jumping from the windows, titled Capitalist Suicide Box. The artist's statement specifically referenced the soulless architects who enable corporate America's stranglehold on urban spaces. I was furious when I saw the exhibition. This is deliberate, Chloe. You knew exactly what this piece was saying when you agreed to show it. It's provocative art, Mark. It's supposed to challenge established norms. There's a difference between challenging norms and personal attacks. How would you feel if I hosted an event mocking modern art as pretentious garbage created by talentless narcissists? That's different, she insisted. Architecture has power and institutional support. Art is the voice of resistance. That's absurd. Your gallery sells pieces to the same wealthy elites who commission the buildings you're criticizing. You're not resisting anything. You're catering to it with a veneer of rebellion. That led to our biggest fight yet, with Chloe accusing me of being exactly the kind of establishment figure the art was critiquing. I slept in the guest room that night, and we barely spoke for days afterward. The incident at the gallery, the one that ended our marriage, happened 2 weeks later. Liminal was hosting a group show called Boundaries, featuring works that supposedly explored personal and societal limits. In reality, it was the usual assortment of provocative but ultimately shallow pieces that seemed designed more to generate Instagram posts than genuine reflection. I arrived late, coming straight from a client meeting. The gallery was packed, and I spotted Chloe immediately, holding court in the center of the room. She looked stunning in a vintage Halston dress, her hair now streaked with dramatic silver highlights that hadn't been there a month ago. I made my way toward her, navigating through clusters of black-clad gallery-goers. That's when I heard it. And here's my husband, the human calculator who builds glass boxes for a living, Chloe announced as she spotted me approaching. Her friends laughed appreciatively. You should hear him talk about concrete reinforcement over dinner. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm married to an engineering textbook. More laughter. I stopped in my tracks, the champagne I just picked up from a passing server cold in my hand. He's currently designing another bank, Chloe continued, unaware that I could hear every word, because apparently what this city needs is another temple to capitalism. Meanwhile, 3 independent art spaces closed last month due to rent hikes. One of her friends, a critic who'd written a particularly scathing review of a building I'd worked on, chimed in, "But darling, without the banks, how would all these corporate drones cash their checks to buy mediocre art for their office lobbies?" They all laughed again, and Chloe raised her glass in salute. To the necessary evil of architecture, making boxes for people to live, work, and die in. Something snapped inside me. Not in a rage-filled way, but more like a clean break. The sudden release of tension when a support beam finally gives way under too much weight. I walked toward the group, my footsteps loud in the momentary lull of conversation. Chloe saw me coming and had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed before recovering with a bright, false smile. "Mark, you made it. We were just talking about the intersection of art and architecture." "No, you weren't," I said quietly. "You were mocking me and my profession to entertain your friends." The circle grew uncomfortably silent. Someone cleared their throat and murmured something about checking out a piece in the back room. "Don't be so sensitive," Chloe said, lowering her voice. "It was just a joke." "It's over," I said simply. Her smile faltered. "What?" "Our marriage, it's over." I placed my untouched champagne on the nearest surface. "I'll be staying at the Peninsula tonight. I'll come by tomorrow to get some things while you're at the gallery." "Mark, you're overreacting," she hissed, aware that people were watching. "We can discuss this at home." "There's nothing to discuss. I've been supporting you, financially, emotionally, professionally, for over a decade. And this is how you see me? As some soulless drone who builds boxes? I'm done." I turned and walked out, ignoring her increasingly frantic calls behind me. Outside, the cool night air hit my face and I took a deep breath. I felt strangely calm, as if I'd just put down an enormous weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I checked into the peninsula as planned. That night, I received dozens of texts and calls from Chloe, ranging from angry accusations, "How dare you humiliate me at my gallery opening?" to tearful apologies, "I didn't mean it. Please come home so we can talk." I responded to none of them. The next day, I went to our loft while Chloe was at the gallery. I packed enough clothes and personal items to last a few weeks, plus my important documents and a few sentimental possessions. I left a note informing Chloe that I'd be filing for divorce and that she should have her lawyer contact mine. What followed was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional fallout. My lawyer, Sandra Reeves, was a shark in a tailored suit, exactly what I needed. During our first meeting, she laid out a strategic approach that would protect my assets while ensuring the process moved quickly. "The prenup is solid," she assured me, flipping through the document. "But Chloe might try to challenge it on grounds of unconscionability, claiming she didn't understand what she was signing." "She knew exactly what she was signing," I said. "She had her own lawyer review it." Sandra nodded. "Good. And regarding the gallery, you've been financing it?" "Substantially, both through direct investment and by covering our living expenses. We'll need documentation of all financial contributions, every check, every transfer, every credit card statement. The more thorough, the better." I spent the next weekend gathering financial records dating back to the beginning of our marriage, a sobering exercise that quantified exactly how one-sided our financial partnership had been. I'd invested over $800,000 in Chloe's gallery over the years, not including the below-market rent I'd arranged through my connections. Chloe initially believed I was bluffing, that I'd come crawling back after making my point. When she realized I was serious, her tactics changed. She began telling friends and acquaintances that I had become controlling and resentful of her success, that I couldn't handle having a wife who outshone me professionally. Her lawyer, a slick character named James Dalton, who specialized in high-profile divorces, tried to portray Chloe as the creative genius whose career I had tried to stifle. During our first mediation session, he painted an almost comical picture of our marriage. "Mr. Callahan consistently undermined his wife's artistic vision," Dalton claimed, leaning forward across the conference table. "He insisted on practical considerations over creative expression, attempting to impose his rigid architectural perspective on Mrs. Callahan's gallery." Sandra remained unruffled. "Interesting interpretation of financial support and professional connections. Tell me, Mr. Dalton, how many of your clients consider an $800,000 investment to be undermining?" The mediator, a retired judge with a no-nonsense demeanor, quickly saw through Dalton's narrative. When he suggested Chloe might be entitled to a portion of my partnership stake in Hammett, Sandra simply produced the prenuptial agreement with Chloe's signature on every page. "Your client explicitly waived any claim to Mr. Callahan's business interests," she pointed out. "In exchange, Mr. Callahan waived any claim to her gallery, despite having financed most of it." The divorce proceedings dragged on for 3 months, during which Chloe tried various tactics to either win me back or extract more money from the settlement. She showed up at my temporary apartment one night, crying and claiming she'd had an epiphany about how she'd taken me for granted. When that didn't work, she threatened to tell the architectural community that I had plagiarized designs, a baseless accusation that would have been laughable if it weren't so malicious. Through it all, I maintained my composure, focusing on my work and letting Sandra handle the legal battles. The first real consequence for Chloe came about a month after our separation. The gallery's quarterly rent was due, and for the first time in years, I wasn't there to write a check when sales fell short. Chloe called me in a panic. "I'm short on the rent," she said without preamble when I answered. "I need $12,000 by tomorrow." "That's unfortunate," I replied calmly. "Mark, don't be petty. This is my livelihood we're talking about." "No, it was our joint investment that you've been treating as your personal vanity project. And now it's your business to manage, including the financial aspects. So you're just going to let the gallery fail after all the work I've put into it? I suggest you talk to a bank. I hear they have money they're willing to lend, despite being temples to capitalism." She hung up on me. Later that day, my lawyer informed me that Chloe was demanding temporary spousal support during the divorce proceedings, citing her gallery's financial difficulties. The judge granted a modest amount, far less than what I had been voluntarily contributing to both our household and her business. 2 months into our separation, I received a call from Thomas Blackwood, the CEO of the real estate company that owned Chloe's gallery building. Tom and I had worked together on several projects, and he'd given Chloe a favorable lease as a personal favor to me. "Mark, good to hear your voice," he said. "Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. Chloe's lease is coming up for renewal next month. Given the circumstances, I'm assuming you don't want me to extend the friends and family discount." I paused. This was a moment where I could have taken the high road, told Tom to give Chloe the same terms as before. But I remembered her mockery, the years of increasing contempt, and the callous ways she had dismissed the work that had kept a roof over our heads and funded her artistic ambitions. "The gallery should be evaluated like any other commercial tenant," I said finally, "based on its merits and market conditions." Tom understood perfectly. Of course, strictly business. A week later, Chloe called me, furious. "They're doubling my rent. This is your doing, isn't it?" "I don't set rental prices for Blackwood properties," I said truthfully. "But you could talk to Tom. You know he'd listen to you." "Why would he listen to me about your business? According to you, I'm just a corporate drone who designs soulless boxes. Surely the brilliant artistic mind behind Liminal can negotiate her own lease." She called me several choice names before hanging up. The divorce became unexpectedly complicated when Chloe tried to claim that her gallery was actually worth far less than my financial records indicated, attempting to minimize the value of what she was keeping in the settlement. Sandra brought in a forensic accountant who uncovered some creative bookkeeping on Chloe's part. She had been hiding some sales and commissions in a separate account. "This doesn't look good for your client," Sandra told Dalton during our next meeting. "Tax fraud isn't something the IRS takes lightly." Faced with the prospect of a potential audit, Chloe suddenly became much more cooperative. The final settlement gave her the gallery and its assets, a lump sum payment that was generous but not excessive, and no ongoing spousal support. In exchange, I kept our loft, my partnership shares, and all my retirement accounts. The day we both signed the final divorce papers was surreal. Chloe and I sat at opposite ends of a conference table, avoiding eye contact as we initialed page after page. She looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes that her expensive makeup couldn't quite conceal. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, not regret exactly, but acknowledgement of what we had once meant to each other. As we stood to leave, Chloe finally looked at me directly. Was it worth it? Destroying everything we built together over one stupid comment? It wasn't one comment, Chloe. It was years of contempt, years of you gradually deciding that what I do, who I am, wasn't worthy of your respect. "That's not true," she protested, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Good luck with the gallery," I said, and walked out without looking back. Meanwhile, my professional life was thriving. The project I had been just designing when Chloe mocked me, the new headquarters for First National Bank, was no mere glass box. It was a pioneering sustainable structure, incorporating green spaces, solar collection, and rainwater harvesting systems. It was also designed to integrate with the surrounding neighborhood rather than towering over it, with public plazas and community spaces at street level. The design was selected as a finalist for the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the most prestigious award in our field. When the announcement was made, my inbox filled with congratulatory messages from colleagues and clients. There was nothing from Chloe. At the awards ceremony in Chicago, I found myself seated at a table with several influential architects and critics. During dinner, the conversation turned to the relationship between architecture and other arts. "Architecture has always been considered somewhat apart from the pure arts," one critic commented. "There's that famous quote about architecture being frozen music, but I wonder if that's just a way of trying to elevate building design to the status of art." "I think it's the opposite," I offered. "Architecture integrates art with function and social responsibility. It's not less than pure art, it's more." The woman next to me, a renowned architect from Spain, nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We don't have the luxury of creating solely for expression or provocation. Our work must stand up, literally, to public use and scrutiny. It must solve problems while also speaking to something deeper." Beautifully put, said the critic. Mark, I understand your bank headquarters project incorporates some innovative community spaces. Could you tell us more about that concept? As I explained the public areas we designed, spaces that would be open to non-customers, including a free co-working area and a gallery showcasing local artists, I couldn't help but think of Chloe. She would have appreciated this aspect of the project, or at least the Chloe I'd fallen in love with would have. 6 months after our separation, our divorce was finalized. The proceedings were relatively straightforward since we had a prenuptial agreement that protected my assets and ownership stake in Hammett Partners. Chloe received a settlement that was generous by legal standards but far less than what she had become accustomed to during our marriage. A week after the divorce was final, I learned that Chloe had been unable to renew her lease at the current market rate. Liminal would have to relocate or close. She made one last desperate attempt to appeal to me. Mark, please, she said when she called. The gallery is everything to me. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry, but don't destroy something I've spent years building. You mean something we spent years building? I corrected her, with my money, my connections, and my support. The support you found so boring and conventional that you turned me into a punchline for your friends. I made a mistake, she admitted, her voice breaking. A terrible mistake. But the gallery isn't just about me. It's about the artists, the community we've built. For a moment I wavered. Then I remembered the look of amusement on her face as she mocked my profession. The years of subtle and not so subtle put-downs. The way she had systematically devalued everything I contributed to our partnership while elevating her own importance. You'll land on your feet, I said. You're resourceful. Maybe one of your artist friends has a space you can use. I hung up before she could respond. It might have been petty, but it felt like justice. The story might have ended there, with Chloe relocating her gallery to a smaller, less prestigious location and me continuing my career at Hammett. But fate had one more twist in store. 2 weeks after our conversation, my firm won the commission to design Chicago's new Center for Performing Arts, a landmark project that would transform an entire block of the downtown area. It was the kind of once-in-a-career opportunity that architects dream about. The project received massive media attention, including a feature in the Chicago Tribune. The reporter asked about my inspiration for the design, which incorporated elements of movement and flow unusual in my previous work. Architecture and art have always been intertwined for me, I explained. This design celebrates that relationship. The structure itself is functional and sound, but it also creates spaces that evoke emotional responses. It's not just a building, it's an experience. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had absorbed more from Chloe's world than she had ever given me credit for. A particularly satisfying moment came at the groundbreaking ceremony for the center. Several prominent figures from Chicago's art world were in attendance, including some of Chloe's former friends. They approached me with newly discovered respect, praising the design's artistic sensibility and emotional intelligence. One of them, the critic who had joked about corporate drones at the gallery that night, seemed particularly eager to establish a friendly connection. Your design transcends conventional architecture, she gushed. It's really quite artistic. All architecture is art, I replied coolly. Some people just lack the vision to see it. She had the grace to look embarrassed. The final twist came 3 months later. Tom Blackwood called me again. Mark, we've been considering the space where Liminal was located. It's in a great area for creative businesses, but it needs the right tenant. I remembered how passionate you used to be about supporting young talent. What are you suggesting? I asked, intrigued. What would you think about helping us convert it into a collaborative workspace for emerging architects and designers? A place where they could have access to resources and mentorship they couldn't afford on their own. The idea appealed to me immediately. It was a chance to give back to my profession in a meaningful way, to create the kind of opportunity I would have treasured when I was starting out. And yes, there was a certain poetic justice in transforming the Chloe's former gallery into a space dedicated to the discipline she had so often disparaged. I'd be happy to consult on the project, I told Tom. 6 months later, the Chicago Design Collaborative opened its doors in the former home of Liminal. I helped design the space, incorporating flexible work areas, State-of-the-art technology, and yes, excellent lighting. Something I had learned the importance of from Chloe, ironically enough. The renovation revealed some interesting secrets about how Chloe had been running her gallery. Behind one of the walls we removed, we found a small storage area containing several counterfeit artworks, convincing copies of pieces by established artists that sold for tens of thousands. Whether Chloe had been knowingly selling fakes or had been duped herself wasn't clear, but it cast her artistic integrity in a new light. At the opening event for the collaborative, a young reporter from an architecture blog asked me about the space's previous incarnation. "It was an art gallery before, wasn't it?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. "But spaces, like people, evolve. This building has good bones. It just needed a purpose that matched its potential." I didn't mention Chloe by name, and the reporter didn't press for details. Later, as I watched eager young architects exploring the space, I felt a sense of closure. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about creation, about taking something broken and making it into something useful and beautiful. I heard through mutual friends that Chloe eventually relocated Liminal to a much smaller space in a less fashionable neighborhood. Without my financial backing and connections, she struggled to maintain the reputation she had built. Some of her artists left for more established galleries, and her assistant Jasper apparently jumped ship to work for a competitor. The collaborative workspace thrived beyond my expectations. Within a year, it had launched the careers of several promising young architects and had become a hub for innovative design thinking in Chicago. We expanded the program to include scholarships for disadvantaged students interested in architecture and design, creating pathways into a profession that had traditionally been dominated by privilege. I didn't take joy in Chloe's difficulties. What we had once shared had been real, at least in the beginning, but I didn't regret my decisions either. Sometimes the only way to truly move forward is to tear down an unstable structure and build something new on solid foundations. The bank headquarters I designed won the Pritzker the following year. At the awards ceremony, a colleague who knew something of my personal history leaned over and whispered, "Not bad for someone who just builds boxes, huh?" I smiled. "It's never been about the shape," I told him. "It's about creating something that lasts." And that ultimately was the difference between Chloe and me. Her world was built on appearances, on momentary provocations, and shifting social currencies. Mine was built on principles that endured: integrity, functionality, and yes, beauty, but beauty with purpose. As I accepted the award and looked out at the audience of my peers, I felt no lingering bitterness toward my ex-wife. In a strange way, I had to thank her. Without the clean break her public humiliation had forced, I might have continued compromising myself for years, pouring resources into a relationship that returned only contempt. Instead, I was free to create on my own terms, to build not just structures, but a legacy. And unlike the artificial boundaries of Chloe's final exhibition at our gallery, that was a line worth drawing. Say, "Hey, my mom."